It was the 4th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. Jesus had just completed 8 mini parables. He went with the disciples back to the Sea of Galilee. Jesus got in the back of the boat, the disciples got in the front of the boat, they headed across the sea, and a terrible storm kicked up, just like that, which, as I understand it, is not all that unusual in the Sea of Galilee. Only this storm was worse than usual. Waves are crashing against the bow of the boat. The wind was whistling through the boat, and the disciples thought, this is it. We're going to die right here in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. And they turned to the back of the boat, and there's Jesus, sound asleep. Don't you just hate it when someone can be utterly and completely calm when you're convinced the world is ending? A number of years ago, I was headed with a friend of mine off the coast of Long Island, where I lived at the time. And we were headed out across the Great South Bay on our kayaks to a favorite lagoon on the other side. And we got about 100 yards from that lagoon, and we both got caught by a trailing wave, which flipped our kayaks over just like that. Now, we had really stable kayaks, so once they flipped over, there was no flipping them back up. You had to do a wet exit. Now, a wet exit means you're pulling up in the spray skirt, and you're pushing yourself out of the kayak like you're taking off a pair of pants, and you're doing all of this while you're upside down underwater. And did I mention, it was late November. That water was so cold. I come to the surface, just arms and legs flailing everywhere. This is, I'm gonna die in the middle of the Great South Bay, and my friend says to me, just as calm can be, Hey, stand up. Yep. Sure enough, water was about 4 feet deep, just kind of pulled the boat back to shore. That was a little embarrassing. That's what's going on here. The disciples are terrified for their lives. Jesus is sound asleep in the back of the boat. They wake him up, not because they think he really can do anything, but they're desperate for any kind of help at this point. And he says, "Oh, you of little faith." And then he speaks to the storm, just 3 words. He says to the storm, "Quiet, be still." Now, I can say that to all 5 of my granddaughters all day long. Nothing ever happens. Jesus says it one time to the storm, and the storm just stopped. Imagine that. You're out here in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. The storm is raging. Jesus speaks 3 words. The storm stops, and very quickly it occurs to the disciples, if at first they were terrified of the storm, now they have another reason to be terrified. Who is this man that with a few simple words, he can calm a raging storm? And if he could calm a raging storm, maybe, just maybe, he could calm the storm raging within them. An important lesson learned in a boat. But then we come to our second boat story I'm going to look at. It's the 14th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus had just fed 5,000 people from a few loaves and fishes. A spontaneous party erupts among the people. We have a new king for Israel, King Jesus. Problem was, Jesus did not want to be the new king of Israel. He left, went up into the mountains alone, told the 12 to go back down and cross the Sea of Galilee. You can see them making their way back to the seaside. Boy, the time seems so right for him to proclaim himself king, but they follow his instruction. They get back to the seaside, they look at the boat, they look at the water, they look at the boat again, deja vu sets in. We do not want to do this. But they head across the Sea of Galilee, and sure enough, a terrible storm kicks up. Only this time, there's no Jesus sound asleep in the back of the boat. And they look out on the water, and a ghost is walking toward them. The ghost speaks. He says, "Take courage, it is I." Interesting word, courage. I always thought being courageous meant to step forward without any fear whatsoever, but finally it occurred to me, that's not courage, that's stupidity. No, courage is stepping forward even though you are absolutely terrified with fear. And Peter said, Lord, if that's you, tell me to walk to you on the water. So Jesus said, okay, walk to me on the water. So Peter got out of the boat and he walked on the water. Have you ever done that? I don't know anybody who's ever done that. Well, actually, I take that back. When I was a kid, I grew up in northern Ohio, and I used to go to this Christian camp, Round Lake Christian Assembly, that had a big round lake. And one night, they were doing Bible reenactment stories, and they decided to do this story, and there was a dock in the lake, and they put just enough ballast in the tanks to take the dock right down to lake level. And it looked really cool. It looked like Jesus was walking on the water. The only problem was Jesus couldn't see where the edge of the dock was. And he fell into the water. It turned out Jesus didn't swim all that well either. And the disciples had to save him from the boat. It kind of ruined the impact of the whole thing. Did the rest of the disciples get out of the boat, walk in the water? Nope, just Peter. Took his eyes off Jesus, cried, Lord, save me. But you and I both know that's not the important point. The important point is that he had the courage to get out of the boat in the first place. There comes a time in life when it's just time to get out of the boat. I knew from the time I was 4 or 5 years of age that I was transgender. In my naivete, I thought I got to choose. I thought a gender fairy would arrive and say, okay, what's it going to be? But alas, no gender fairy arrived, so I just lived my life. I did not hate being a boy. I just knew I was not one. I went to college, got married, had kids, built a career, but the call toward authenticity has all the subtlety of a smoke alarm. And eventually decisions have to be made. And so I came out as transgender and promptly lost every single one of my jobs. I had never had a bad review. Within 24 hours, I lost every single job. I lost my pension, worth well over $1 million. In all 50 states of the United States, you cannot fire someone for being transgender, well, at least not yet. But in all 50, you can fire someone if you're transgender and you work for a religious corporation. Good to know. It's not easy being a transgender woman. People often ask me, do you feel 100% like a woman? Well, first of all, I say, if you've talked to one transgender person, guess what? You've talked to one transgender person. I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I feel 100% like a transgender woman. There are things a cisgender woman knows I will never know. That said, I am learning a lot about what it means to be a woman, and I'm learning a lot about my former gender, and I'm here to tell you the differences are massive. Let's start with the little stuff. The pockets on women's jeans. Can someone explain this to me? They are utterly and completely useless. I bought a pair of jeggings last month. They have stitching there that makes you think there's a pocket, but there's no pocket. The whole thing's a trick. And I spoke at the Levi's Corporation headquarters in San Francisco a couple of years ago. I thought, this is it. I'll find out about the pockets on women's jeans. I asked them. They said, yeah, just always been that way. Or the size of a woman's wardrobe. As a guy, I had a couple of pairs of jeans, a couple of pairs of khaki pants, a couple of blue sport coats, a couple of suits. What do you need? As a woman, I have closets and closets full of clothes because people will notice if you wear something too often. Well, men won't notice because they're men, but women will notice and they will judge you for it. Here's a phrase you will never hear spoken to a man. You will never hear anybody say to a man, dude, that is not a good haircut for a man over 50. Because we don't care if a man looks like he's over 50 or 60 or 70 for that matter. But a woman, People say, "Who's your hairdresser?" as if to say, "Do you really even have a hairdresser? And if you do, does she know you're over 50? There's no way a well-educated white male can understand how much the culture's tilted in his favor. There's no way he can understand how much closer he started to the finish line than everybody else. There's no way he can understand that because it's all he's ever known and all he ever will know. And conversely, there's no way for a woman to understand the full import of that because being a woman is all she's ever known. Now, she might have an inkling. She's working twice as hard for 75% as much. But really, she has no idea how much more difficult life is for her than it is for the guy in the Brooks Brothers jacket in the office across the hall. I know. I was that guy. And the truth is, I will not live long enough to lose my white male entitlement. I brought it with me when I transitioned. But that doesn't mean I don't see it diminishing. I was brought onto the board of a sizable nonprofit. We have a big annual conference. We had a brand new CEO. And in a board meeting, we were talking about whether or not we wanted to have the CEO speak for the conference. And I said, well, she's not a seasoned speaker. It might be better if we, just interview her. But I said, if you want her to give a keynote, I'm happy to coach her. At which point, a powerful white man in the room said, well, if we're going to do that, why don't we hire a real coach? Now, I knew a number of women there knew my credentials. I waited for someone to speak up on my behalf. Nobody said a word. I can tell you what I wanted to say. I wanted to say, I've done 3 TED Talks that have had, 10 million views. I'm a coach for the largest TEDx in North America. I'm a speaker's ambassador for TED. I've taught speech in 3 universities, 2 in the United States, 1 in Europe. What part about that does not make me a real coach? But instead I said nothing. Because I had discovered by then, if you say something, well, now you're just that woman. If there's one thing, just one thing, I wish I could go back and say to Paul, it would be this. Assume a woman knows what she's talking about and treat her accordingly. Really. That and I'm so sorry, guys, but please stop interrupting us. Seriously, just stop interrupting us. Do you know that men interrupt women twice as often as they interrupt other men? It's not easy being a transgender woman, and particularly not easy right now. So on January 21st, 2021, it was my great honor to be one of the speakers at the Biden inaugural prayer service. I spoke to the president, the vice president, their families, members of Congress. Quite an honor. 4 years later, to the day, I was sitting at my desk reading an executive order signed by the president the day before that said, I, as a transgender person, do not exist. What a difference 4 years can make. So I was talking about this on NPR a couple of months ago, and I said I had renewed my passport back in November, and it's a good thing because had I renewed it in February, it would have had the wrong gender on it. But a couple of days later, I thought, was that a very smart thing to have done? How do I know somebody was not listening to that who had the capacity to cancel my passport and issue a new one with the wrong gender? That's how paranoid we've gotten. But then I thought about it. It was NPR. I don't think anybody with the capacity to cancel the passport would have been listening to NPR, right? It is not easy being a transgender woman, or an immigrant, or anybody who is able to benefit from diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. It is not easy, and I'm here to tell you, we really need your help. So many corporations have moved away from us. So many people have been so silent this Pride Month. We need your help. First of all, we need you to be allies. to speak up on our behalf. In the State of the Union message, Donald Trump railed for 10 minutes against immigrants and for 5 minutes against transgender people. In the Democratic response, there was a single comment about immigrants and nothing said about transgender people. That's not going to make it. We need allies who will speak on our behalf, and more than allies, we need apprentices. You see, as an ally, you're the one deciding what it is you're going to do, what it is you're going to say to help out a particular group. But as an apprentice, you're working at the direction of the group you're serving. We need allies and we need apprentices. Second, we need for people to stop apologizing for religion. Seriously. Religion is not the problem. A certain kind of religion is the problem. Do you know that we as a species never took off when we stayed at the level of blood kin? We didn't take off until we moved from the level of blood kin to the level of tribe. And what is it that brought us together as communities, as tribes? It was not our need for safety, as many think. It was our search for meaning. Think Stonehenge or the carved bodies of Rapa Nui. There has never been a culture in the history of mankind that has not had robust religious communities. What I want to know is, why have we ceded robust religious communities to the far right? Why aren't we those robust religious communities we were even 50 years ago? Stop apologizing for religion. And then I think we need people to start talking about Jesus again. Jonathan Rauch has written a book that came out just recently called Cross Purposes, and it's quite interesting because in that book, he says, who knew that Christianity was a load-bearing wall of American democracy? Now, what makes it even more interesting that he said that is that Jonathan Rauch is a gay Jewish atheist. And yet he said Christianity was a load-bearing wall of American democracy. And he says it's a shame because the church on the far left has abandoned Jesus in favor of nebulous spirituality, and the church on the far right has abandoned Jesus in favor of Christian nationalism, and nobody's focused on Jesus. There's a 22nd chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. The very last day of Jesus' public ministry kind of had a press conference atmosphere with a lot of people ready to ask him questions, and he answered 3 of them. The final question asked was, which of the laws is the greatest? He answered quickly. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as you love your own self. There was no surprise in that answer. They began every religious service quoting those laws. It's what he said next that they were not prepared for. He said, on this are all the law and prophets based. In other words, it's not about the 613 laws of the Hebrew Scriptures. It's about loving God, loving neighbor, and loving self. And Matthew tells us there was dead silence. This is a press conference. They had questions to take them till midnight, but there's dead silence. And Matthew then says, from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions. Being a follower of Jesus really was that simple. Loving God, loving neighbor, loving self. I said simple, I did not say easy. Loving God. The God who burst on the scene 14 billion years ago, in all of God's complexity, mystery, and ever-expansiveness, rooted in relationship and grounded in love. Yeah, I just defined the Big Bang. The God who burst on the scene 14 billion years ago in all of God's complexity, mystery, and ever-expansiveness, rooted in relationship. Quantum physics tells us that the key building blocks of the universe are not made of matter. The key building blocks of the universe is a pattern of relationships between non-material entities. So if the key building blocks of the universe are relationships, is it really that much of a stretch to say the most powerful force in the universe is love? To love that God, to love our neighbor, every last one of them, whether they're next door or sitting in Tehran, to love our neighbor. And to love ourselves. And you can't do the first two if you can't do the third. I was having a hard time loving myself. I lost all of my jobs, all of my friends. I probably knew 1,000 people by name in my denomination. I was a national leader. Post-transition, I've had substantive conversations with 6 of them. And I lost my parents. My father was a fundamentalist pastor. My mother was even more conservative than my father. She demanded that he disown me when I transitioned, and he acquiesced, and they disowned me. But I knew it wasn't Dad's heart. So I took a chance and called him on his 93rd birthday. He took my call. We talked for about a half an hour, and a couple of weeks later, I called again and asked if I could come for a visit. And he said yes. And then a couple of weeks before I was there, he surprised me by calling me and telling me my mother was going to be there, which I didn't expect. And that April, on a warm day in central Kentucky, I had a delightful 3-hour visit with my parents. And as I stood to go, my father stood with me. And he said, "Paula, it's the first time he ever called me Paula. He said, "Paula, I do not understand this, but I am willing to try." My father was 93 years old and willing to try. That's love. He died at 96 5 years ago. I miss him so, so much. A man who loved God, loved neighbor, loved self. One of my favorite poets is Mary Oliver, and from the time the service first started, this poem keeps coming to mind, and so I want to share it. It's called The Journey. One day you knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. One day you knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble, and you felt the old tug at your ankles. "Mend my life," each voice cried, but you did not stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind ripped away at the stiff foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough in a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, as you left their voices behind, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, a new voice, a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Will you pray with me? Give us courage, God, to get out of the boat. We know what it is we're supposed to do. We know where you've called us. We're just terrified to answer the call. Give us the courage we need Give us the self-love to be willing to accept that, yeah, we're going to take our eyes off you and fall into the water. But give us courage to answer your call to loving you, to loving all of our neighbors, and to loving ourselves because we can't do the first two if we can't do the third. This is my prayer in the name of Christ. Amen.